Okay, it's Parshas Vayechi. So Kodim called Chazak, right? We finish a Chumash, and we say to ourselves, to one another, Chazak, Chazak v'nis Chazek. Right? Chazak, Chazak. Be strong, and we'll be stronged. The taich, I always think about the words Chazak, Chazak v'nis Chazek, like the pasuk. Yechayenu miyomayim b'yoyim hashlishi yikimeni v'nichi lefonav. It's a pasuk. I mean, we don't know the pasuk from the Chassidus, from the Tanakh. We know the pasuk from the Maimorim. Yechayenu, it's Maimorim Rosh Hashanah. Yechayenu miyomayim, and Yechayenu miyomayim. For 2 days, Hashem has to give us life, and b'yoyim hashlishi on the third day yikimeni v'nichi lefonav. It's as if we have our own life, and it's connected to the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's also connected to Elam Hazeh, Yemei Mashiach, and Elam Haba. So when you say Chazak, Chazak v'nis Chazek, Chazak means you need to draw strength from outside of yourself. Chazak means you need to draw strength from outside of yourself. V'nis Chazek, that the strength is going to be, the fortitude is going to be from the inside. That's the taich. That's the Pashut taich of the word. Chazak, Chazak, strengthen yourself. V'nis Chazek, and the chayzek, the strength will be self-achieved. And just to give you a Maimah Chazal to support this, the Chazal tell us that it says in the pasuk, we say it every day in davening, right? Ruchi asher alecha, v'dvareich asani beficha lo yamushu mipicha mipi zaracha mipi zera zaracha omar ad Hashem yatav ad elam. Right, the spirit which is upon you will not depart from you, from your children, or from your grandchildren, your seed and the seed of your seed from now until forever. And on this the Gemara says, Chut hamishulash. When you have a rope which has been tripled, in other words, has a triple strength, it's not easily undone. And this idea, when you have in a family Torah 3 generations, so then it stays in the family. And I think that's one of the interpretations of the Chazak, Chazak v'nis Chazek. When a person learns Torah the first time, he has to work hard in learning the Torah. A person learns Torah the second time, he has to work hard learning in the Torah. When a person learns Torah the third time, the Torah becomes his. I heard from Reb Melech. I didn't hear it from him directly, but I heard it when I was in Maristan. And Reb Melech used to say, a Maimah you have to learn 3 times. First, you have to learn a Maimah, just know what the Maimah is about, to familiarize yourself. Then you have to learn the Maimah and struggle with the Maimah so that you can get at the nuance, the detail, the difficulties, the preciseness of the Maimah. Then you have to learn it a third time to experience the richness of the Maimah, the lichtigkeit, the light of the Maimah. Chazak, Chazak, v'nis Chazek. So every year we read the Torah, and each one of the Sfarim we say Chazak, Chazak, v'nis Chazek. Anyway, what's my topic? My topic is Yaakov Avinou Leimeis. Parshas Vayechi is one of the shortest Parshas in Sefer Bereshis. Maybe it is actually the shortest, with the fewest psukim. It's certainly not an easy parsha or a parsha without its unusual points. Brachos Yaakov is very, very unusual. And Derech Agav, I heard from Yisrael, our tzaddik, that the Yisrael, of course, he told me once that Beklal in the Chumash, the Targum Yenis, Targum Unkelos is a Metargum. Unkelos Hageh translates words. Targum Yenis and Benazil, the other Targum, which is printed in the Mikrais Gedelis, doesn't just translate words, he explains to you the ideas. Rabbi Yisrael told me that the one exception to this is the Brachos Yaakov. The Brachos Yaakov in Parshas Vayechi, Unkelos doesn't just translate the words, he gives you meaning behind the words. One of the things, I was sitting this afternoon thinking about what to talk about, one of the things that crossed my mind, I didn't do it because it was too hard for me, to go through the Targum Unkelos. Targum Unkelos on Brachos Yaakov is different than the Targum in the whole Chumash. He doesn't just translate the words, he gives you insight into what's the meaning behind the Brachos Yaakov. And then the story with Rachel is a very serious business. That Rachel is buried on the road, and Yaakov has to be buried in Maras Machpelah. The Malach HaGoyel is a big deal. The Sikel Es Yadav is also a big deal. And then, of course, that Nistalka Mimenu Shechina, Yaakov wants to reveal Mashiach is going to come, and the Shechina leaves him. There's a lot of things in our Pasha. And of course, the Birchas Yaakov themselves. The point in Parshas Vayechi which grabs me is the Chitas. Today is what? Today is Wednesday. It's the Chitas of Friday. Tanya's Chitas on Friday is the same as the Chumash Chitas. We're going to finish. Today we learn Pedikut Beis, right? Pedikut Beis is 3 pages. It's divided into 4 parts. So we read it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The last few lines of the Tanya Chitas of Friday is going to be from the Chumash Chitas of Friday. This year, it's not always that way. That's what? That a Beinani, we're talking about a Beinani, has been Adam Lamakam. A Beinani is a righteous Jew. He never does any Avedis. He's so careful with his thought, with his speech, with actions, so on and so forth. But a Beinani is not only Ben Adam Lamakam. A Beinani is also Med Machaveri. A Beinani is between man and fellow. So the Alter Rebbe says, what is the Hanhaga of a Beinani? Ben Adam Lachaveri, Le'esnai ki Yosef v'mechav, Le'shalom tevet achasra. To behave like Yosef behaved with his brothers, to pay good for bad. I think I gave a class on it. If I haven't, I'll do it next year, Neder. It's one of the most poignant stories in the Chumash. It's really amazing. Yosef's brothers tried to kill him. Who are we kidding? Yosef's brothers wanted to kill him. They threw him into a pit. The pit was full of venomous snakes and scorpions. Reuven threw him into the pit. And Reuven wanted to save him. But even Reuven threw the pit full of... And Yehuda sold him. What was Yehuda saying? Let somebody else kill him. Thank you very much. We shouldn't kill him. Let him suffer and he'll die at the hands of the Midyanim, the Seichanim, the Yishmaelim, the Mitzrayim. They try to kill their brother. And of course, their $1 million question is they never went to look for him. They just forgot about him. They just accepted that he's gone. Tarif Tarif Yosef. Then he turns up 22 years later. And he's so, after he plays with their minds for a while, he's incredibly nice to them, totally embracing and forgiving and kind and generous. And then their father passes away after 17 years. And the brothers are convinced that Yosef is going to spring a trap. They're convinced that now that Avinu passed away, Yosef is going to create some kind of a scheme, some kind of a confusion. He's going to spring a trap and he's going to give them what they gave him. The raya that they have to this, the proof that indicates this, is that Yosef used to come every day to eat with his father, the Moltzeit. He would eat with his father every day. In Goshen was away from the big city. And as soon as Avinu passed away, Yosef stops coming, so you don't see him. And when you don't see a person, automatically you start to imagine things. And they went into such a panic. They were so sure that Yosef was going to take revenge that they sent emissaries, sent shluchim, to beg and lie, and say to Yosef HaTzadik, Avicha tziva lefnei moisoi leime. These are such beautiful words. Ana, sana, please forgive lefesha achecha v'chatasam kira'a gmalucha. Sana lepesha avdi alekei avicha. Right, the brother sent shluchim to go to Yosef HaTzadik and say, your father said before he died that you should forgive us. And Rashi says Yaakov didn't do that. Because it didn't cross Yaakov's mind for a moment that Yosef would take revenge. And the brother's paranoia was not Yaakov's paranoia. He didn't even think of such a thing. And then they come themselves, they fall on the ground, they say, we'll be your slaves. Like the Pasuk says, Yosef is crying. How could you even think I would take revenge? How could you even think I would take revenge? He says, in our pash. So in the Chitas of Friday, in Tanya, which is going to be the same Chitas in Chumash, it's a very unusual convergence. We're going to learn in Tanya, the last lines of chapter 12 are going to be that you should behave like Yosef with his brothers, to pay good for bad. And we're going to also learn the Parsha in the Chumash, in the Sefer in the Chumash, in the Chitas of Friday. Anyway, this is the most meaningful and important message of Parsha Vayechi. I want you to know the hardest thing in the world to be Ma'avid Amid Yosef. You could be from Bein Adam Lamakim till Malach Gavriel is humbled by you. People could be the highest standards of kashrus and the highest standards of tefillin. I put today tefillin for $1 million. and you could be the Allah Zachar be the highest standard. When it comes to Ben Adam Lachaveri, Ben Adam Lachaveri is hard. It's a fact of life. To be from between man and fellow is harder than to be from between man and God. And the person who could be Ma'avid Amid Yosef, somebody heard him. And he says, let it go. Let it go. Luz, leave it alone. It's one of the most remarkable midas tevas any human being can possibly possess. It's one of the hardest things to achieve. You know, in the culture, they call it forgiveness. In the world. And they talk about forgiveness as good for the forgiver. You should forgive somebody else because you don't want to hold on to the anger, because you don't want to hold on to the, the old joke. What is hatred? Hatred is you drink poison and you wait for the other guy to drop dead. When you're angry, you burn out your own engine. You don't burn out the other guy's engine. That's how they explain it in psychology. But in Torah it's called the Maver al Midasav. My Midas are saying this person wronged me, and in Midas Adin and Shuras Adin it's true. And Yosef Atzadik's Mishalem Tevet HaChasra is extraordinary. I want you to know, I knew such a person. I knew a man who was deeply wronged by other people, 50, 60 years before I was born. And when they were old, the person who was wronged was so kind to the person who wronged him. He would sit in his house every day for hours. His wife had died, he was alone. He would sit in his house for hours. And I said to my father, Tad, this is Midas Yosef HaTzadik, Mishalem Tevet HaChasra. He said, yeah, it is. I knew a person who was deeply hurt by somebody else, and many, many years later, not the Pshat didn't hold a grudge. He was so kind to this person, it is extraordinary. And this is one of the most important components of Parshas Vayechi. It's the end of the Parsha, and no one pays attention. There's not a lot of Rashis, but it's a very important part of the story. Anyway, having said that, David, you wanted to say something?
I was curious, why did Yosef play with their minds originally?
Why did he?
Play with their minds originally.
The simple answer is he wanted to fulfill the dreams. Yosef knew that they were chalemis emes. But klal, you say a dream is chalemis shav yadaber. Dreams are lies. But sometimes a dream is a chizayin, it's a machazeh, it's a mare, it's a nevuah. Yosef knew that his dreams were real. And he had to get the shemesh and yerech and the achados yechovim to bow down to him. That's the Pashat Pshat. There's many other Pshat, but this is the Pashat Pshat. Another Pshat is Yosef was being masakin them. By Yosef doing this to them, he spared them what they would have gotten on the other side, which would have been a lot more unpleasant.
Said that Torah has a way of viewing forgiveness. What was it? Like, not that it's for yourself.
Right, Ma'aver al Midasav.
What does that mean?
To go past your own midah, your own feeling. Your feeling is, this person wronged me. In America, there's an expression, righteous indignation. I'm hating you and I have a right to. So to say I'm going to stop hating you because I don't want to suffer, it's also a big madrega. But to stop hating you because what's the point?
But why are you stopping to hate? Because what's the point? Like, where is that all stemming from?
From the Eibishter. The Chazal say, Kol ha'mayver al mideisav, a person who's able to forgive people who hurt him, it's one of the highest human achievements in Torah.
Because you should, not because you want.
Correct. It's because it's correct. Right. And it's hard. It's very difficult to do. It's a fact of life.
But how do you have real forgiveness if you don't want to forgive? Like, how are you going to forgive? How do you have that feeling of forgiveness, actual forgiveness, if you don't want to do it? You can't say, I'm forgiving because Hashem wants me to, but you can't cause the emotion of forgiveness.
Oh, that's not true. No, the beginning of forgiveness is letting go. And after you let go, you could forgive. We call it, in the modern world, they use the word forgiveness. Torah uses the word Ma'aver al Mideisav. Forgiveness is a separate aspect. Relatively speaking, it's a detail. To not feel a grudge towards somebody else. I know a story about in 1991, the story, a Yid in Crown Heights, I'm not going to say any names. A Yid in Crown Heights, he's a Ben Yachid, he's an only son. His father came from Russia, whenever he came from Russia. His father was a very beloved man, a beautiful, very beloved. His father was very friendly. He was a Ben Yachid, so every year he would take his father Shalach Manas. And he would deliver Shalach Manas to many people who were friends of his father. Most of the people his father was sending Shalach Manas to were people who owed his father money, to be honest, because that's the kind of a man he was. There was one person who would deliver Shalach Manas every year, and when he would, the person receiving the Shalach Manas would respond very ambivalently. You could see it was weird. He couldn't understand. Every year when he brought the Shalach Manas, he saw that the recipient of the Shalach Manas was very uncomfortable. Anyway, in 1991, the Soviet Union gave out people's KGB files. This father had sat in prison. And he knew how to read Russian, apparently. He was in his parents' home, and he sees the document, starts reading it. He discovered the person whom his father was sending him Shalach Manas was his Musar. was the one who mastered on him. The one who informed them. The reason he sat in jail. Now, don't think that if a person was a Moser, I mean, they would torture you and squeeze you. To be a Moser, I mean, it wasn't like he was a bad person. They blackmailed him, whatever they did to him. The bottom line is, so he understood why this person is acting so funny when he brings him Shalach Manos. Anyway, his father walks into the house. He says, Tai, I don't understand. I'm looking at this paper. Why are you sending Shalach Manos to this person? His father got so upset. He had no right to read it. In a minute, he made a fire, put it in the sink, and he put it into papers. He didn't want his son to know. This is a special madrega. This is madrega's Yosef HaTzadik. Ma'aber al Mid Yosef. Okay, I want to talk about the Yaakov Avinu Leimes, right? It's an unusual thing that it says by Avram Avinu, it says, Vayigva Vayomas. Right? He expired, he died, Vayosef Alamov. By Yitzchak Avinu, it also says Vayomas. By Yaakov Avinu, there's a word missing. It says Vayigva, Vayosef Alamov. Whatever Vayigva means, he expired. Vayosef Alamov, he was collected to his people. It doesn't say the word Vayomas. So on this, the Gemara says, Yaakov Avinu Leimes. Yaakov Avinu did not die. Of course, the part of this which is interesting is, it says by Yankov. It doesn't say by Yitzchak. It doesn't say by Avram. Which means that this is unique to Yaakov Avinu. Somehow Yaakov Avinu is different than Avram Avinu and Yitzchak Avinu. That dafka by Yaakov Avinu, you say Yaakov Avinu Leimes. So the Gemara says, wait, I want to read you Rashi. On these words, Yaakov Avinu Leimes, Rashi says, Elachai hu le'elam. He lives forever. Then the Gemara says, there's a different case, did they do whatever they did as a final right for Yaakov Avinu for nothing if it was really alive? And the Gemara answers, Mikra Niderish. Rabbi Yochanan said, I know that Yaakov Avinu Leimes, it's a pasuk. And the pasuk says, and he explains the pasuk. We all know this. This is Chamisha B'Tevis stuff, Hey Tevis stuff, right? Now, when you read the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan says Yaakov Avinu Leimes. So I think Rabbi Yitzchak asks him. So the whole Kvura and the whole Chanita, by the way, I want to say this parenthetically, is a diuk in Rashi and Chumash, that in Mitzrayim they did the mummification. Right? The mummification is a very, very involved process. And the mummification process involves disemboweling the person. It involves things that you're not allowed to do. They exhume from the body all the innards, all the viscera, and they take the brain out, actually. And their shita about afterlife and preserving the body, the best thing you do for a body is bury it. So it should decompose. If a body stays whole, the neshama is trapped. The neshama is stuck in the goof. The neshama can't leave till the body rots. It's very important to be chayzel yafar that the neshama should leave the goof. But the Mitzrayim had whatever Avodah Zarah culture they had. They believed preserving the body. So they did the Chanita and Yaakov Avinu. So Rashi says, Ma'aseh Merkachas Psamim. That Chanita by Yaakov Avinu was not the regular process of mummification that they did by the kings of Egypt. It was just put Psamim around him. And when I'm reading that Rashi, the only thing I could think of, what Rashi is saying is, that even though they use the same word, that Yaakov Avinu went through Chanita, which means mummification. In the case of Yaakov Avinu, they didn't do mummification, they just did Ma'aseh Merkachas B'Samim. Why? Because Yaakov Avinu Leimes, he was alive. So when you read the Gemara, and the Yitzchak says, so then it was all for nothing, and he answers him, Mikra Niderish, Ma'azari B'Chaim. So right away you think that this doesn't mean Yaakov Avinu is physically alive. It means something esoteric. It means something mystical. Because when you say that the proof that Yaakov Avinu is alive is his children are alive, that fakat Yaakov Avinu passed away, he lives on in his children. So Rashi says, who's the fanatic? Rashi is the fanatic. On these words, says Rashi, Nibel Lehem Shemeis. They thought he died. In other words, Rashi insists that even when the Yochanan says Mikra Niderish, when Yaakov says my raya that Yaakov Avinu is a pasuk, and he explains the pasuk that it means Mazari B'Chaim Afu B'Chaim, teaches it. Rashi they thought he passed away, but in fact Yaakov Avinu was still alive. Now I just want to say as an advertisement, there are two sichas of the Rebbe, one in Parshas Vayechi and one in Parshas Shmos. The Sikh in Vayechi is a Chelik Lamed Hey, Yaakov Avinu Leimes. And the Siach in Shmos is in Chelik Chavav Moshe Rabbeinu Leimeis. It's interesting. It's two Pashas in a row. And I was thinking, just for fun, maybe I'll do next week Moshe Rabbeinu Leimeis. But there's Yaakov Avinu Leimeis in our Parsha in Chelik Lamed Vav Lekut Sichos, and there's Moshe Rabbeinu Leimeis in next week's Parsha in Perek Chavav. And the Nekuda that the Rebbe says is that by these tzaddikim is different than other tzaddikim. But other tzaddikim, you say that their life is through their Talmidim, through their Torah. By these two, you say no, that because of their Talmidim and because of their Torah, they are actually alive. They are actually alive. So this is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this inyan of Yaakov Avinu Leimeis. And of course, when you look in the Mefarshim, there's two tracts. In other words, there's two basic approaches. One approach says it's literal. It's mamish, kipshute, Yaakov Avinu is physically alive. Moshe Rabbeinu was physically alive. And there are those Mefarshim who go in that direction. And then of course there's another bunch of Mefarshim who say, no, Yaakov Avinu Leimeis doesn't mean Yaakov Avinu is physically alive. It means Yaakov Avinu is spiritually alive. And of course the connotation is, if you go in the second oifen, that it's not just Yaakov Avinu, it's all tzaddikim. If you go in the oifen, that Yaakov Avinu Leimeis means Yaakov is physically alive, you could say that this is unique. Somehow Yaakov is different than the other, even than Avraham and Yitzchak, Yaakov Avinu Leimeis. But if you say that Yaakov Avinu Leimeis is a spiritual, it's a metaphysical idea, through his children, or the fact that Mitas Shleim, I'm going to talk about different details on this. So the Chayre includes Avraham and Yitzchak as well, even though we use the Lashon Yaakov Avinu Leimeis by Yaakov Avinu. Let's first talk the spiritual way. Okay, good. Melly.
I will only mention it by Yaakov, only spiritually.
Faked, I said what I said to bring to the fore this question, this difficulty, meaning to say that's a proof to support the opposite position. Okay? So let's first go with the spiritual idea, Yaakov Avinu Leimeis. And by the way, let's talk about Chamisha B'Tevis. Talk about the Sfarim, right? Without the deeper pshat. When the Rebbe said Yaakov Avinu Leimeis, of course the Rebbe spoke many times the other way, that it's Begashmis and Kipshute, I'll get to that. But the simple pshat of Ma Zarei B'Chaim, Afu B'Chaim is this. A tzaddik's life was never his goof. A tzaddik's life, like it says in Tanya, was always Emunas Hashem and Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. A tzaddik's life is always a neshama. And B'klal neshamas are forever. A body is temporary, a soul, every soul is forever. So what's the pshat that you say a tzaddik lives? The teretz is, since his life was Emunah Ava V'Yireh, and Emunah Ava V'Yireh is not connected to a goof, anybody who has Emunah Ava V'Yireh because of that tzaddik is the Leimeis of that tzaddik. Anybody who follows in the ways of any person who follows in the pathway, lives according to the inspiration of the tzaddik, in that person is Leimeis. In other words, that's a spiritual angle on it, if you will. So there's a couple of points that I want to mention. Number one, you cannot say by Avraham Leimeis, you cannot say by Yitzchak Leimeis, because Avraham and Yitzchak had children who were Rishayim. And if you say Leimeis, you're going to say that their children were Rishayim. There's two ways to spin this, but one of them is, are also Leimeis. If Avraham is forever, then Yishmael is forever. And then Esav is forever. So you cannot say by Avraham and Yitzchak Leimeis, because that would mean that his children who were Rishayim are also Leimeis. By Yaakov Avinu, since it was Mitas Shleim Leimeis. Now, I want you to understand, there's two ways of spinning this. One way of spinning this is, if Avraham is Leimeis, then Yishmael is Leimeis. If Yitzchak is Leimeis, then Esav is Leimeis. But the other way of spinning it is, since they produced a child who was a Rasha, there is the Chesarn in them, and the Chesarn in them has to result in Misa. In other words, this idea that Leimeis, because they were not Mitas Shleima, can be explained in two ways. Number one, their offspring can't be forever, so they can't be forever. And number two, that they produced an offspring, which was a Rasha, which means that there's a Chesarn in them, which does not allow for the even from Leimeis. Another idea is that they live in their children. Yaakov Avinu Leimeis means that Yaakov Avinu lives in his children. The Chiddush is, and this is really the Sikha from Shmos, which from Moshe Rabbeinu. The Chiddush is, the Gemara says, the Chazal say that nothing really dies. Right? Nothing really dies. The heavens don't die because they live forever. And the earth doesn't die because it procreates indefinitely. You have children forever and ever, right? Every living creature has children. And in their children, they live on. So the Yaakov Avinu Leimei says that because their children are going to follow in the footsteps of Yaakov Avinu, so Yaakov Avinu Leimei. The difference, however, is that by most other tzaddikim, when you say that they live on in their children, it doesn't mean there's no inyan of Misa. It just means that they're taking over his space somehow. And by Yaakov Avinu, by Moshe Rabbeinu, it's different. I'm not sure exactly how this is, but the difference is that we say that because their children live the way they live, they themselves are living. And then you have the Rabbeinu Bechaya. Now the Rabbeinu Bechaya is really the crossover between the two. In other words, what I'm doing is, I'm trying to translate Yaakov Avinu Teimeis in two ways. Number one, it's a spiritual thing. Number one, it's an actual thing. Rabbeinu Bechaya says something very, very interesting, most interesting. Rabbeinu Bechaya says, when a person lives and passes away, what happens? A person lives and passes away, what happens? When they were alive, they were Moshe, they were Chaim, they were Avraham, they were Yosef, they were Baruch, they were Shneir. When they pass away, they're tzrura b'tzeira Chaim es Hashem. They're bound up in the bound of life with Hashem. And Bechaya says, when your neshama goes back l'mayla, it becomes a part of what it was before it separated. In other words, your neshama was a piece of Hashem before it came into this world. Your neshama finishes its mission. It goes back l'mayla, and it becomes a piece of Hashem again. That's Taich Meis. The guf dies, it goes in the ground. The neshama died, it stops having a self-identity. And then he writes, and I don't have the words, but some of the words I wrote down. There's Yechidei Hadoiros, in special rare individuals throughout the generations, Shenishmeisehem, Oilois, V'yordois, that the neshamas go up and down. And the idea, what Rabbi Bechaya is saying is, most people, including tzaddikim, when they pass away, their neshama no longer self-identifies. Right? A great psychological word, which is an important psychological word, is the word individuate. When you're a little child, you live in a house, you're a part of a family. When you become a teenager, when you become an adult, but everybody, it happens differently, you start to see yourself as a person. I own me. I don't belong to my father. I don't belong to my mother. I belong to me. I'm a separate entity. It's called individuation. Individuation is a very, very important part of maturing, right? You have to identify with yourself as an individual. This is not just only from Yeshes. It's also an responsibility. I have to choose my path. I have to take responsibility for my life. V'chuli, v'chuli, v'chuli. Individuation. Most tzaddikim, most neshamas, they go l'mayla, they stop being individual, they become a part of the cosmos, they become a part of the great unity. Some tzaddikim remain individual. They're so great that Rabbi Bechaya's lashon is yechidei hadoiros, that even after they pass away, the neshamas can go up and down. They're still individual, they're separate. So now, let me go about this backwards. First of all, I want to tell you the Rebbe's Vart. And the Rebbe's Vart is interesting, because he was basically quoting the Rebbe said about the Frierdiker Rebbe, the same thing the Frierdiker Rebbe said about the Rebbe Rashab, about his father. That after the Rebbe Rashab passed away, one of the Hasidim said to the Frierdiker Rebbe about the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Nishmas Hayden, that the Rebbe is in Gan Eden. And the Frierdiker Rebbe got really upset, and he said, why are you sending my father to Siberia? Why are you sending my father to slave labor? I don't say Nishmasei Eden, I don't say his Neshama is in Gan Eden, I say Nishmasei Bi, his Neshama is in me. So the Rebbe repeated that whole story, and he said, Ich sag oichet Nishmasei Eden, I refuse to say that his Neshama is in Gan Eden, I say Nishmasei Bi, my Neshama is in me. But the Rebbe added an explanation. He says, first of all, the Rebbe is the Balabas. In other words, the Rebbe said that this idea that Rabbeinu Bechaya proposes in the end of Vayechi, it's a very short Rabbeinu Bechaya actually, that most neshamas, when they pass away, they lose their individuation. They stop being themselves. Yechidei hadoiros, even after they pass away, they retain a self-identity. And they're a balabas, they choose where to be. They choose where to be. And they prefer to be in Gashmias and to be in Ruchnias. And the Rebbe said, why? Because Ruchnias is called Giluyim. Ruchnias is only spiritual. It's a light of Elokus. And in Gashmias is Atzmus, right? The Eibishter himself, Atzmus, and Hussein Baruch, God himself is in a physical mitzvah. So tzaddikim who have control over the neshama after the neshama is separated from the guf, prefer Gashmias, because Gashmias is Atmos, and the Elmas Enim is Ruchnias. But the coup de grace of this whole thing is a Sefer Chasidim, which I think that Abiנו B'chaya quotes. There's a Gemara in Masechet Ksubas, which I'm talking about in a minute, and there's a Sefer Chasidim. If you want to read the literal version of Yaakov Avinu Loi Meis in Shas, you have to read what's called Ashkafta de Rebbe. Ashkafta is a whole blot. It starts in Ksubas Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, and it finishes in Ksubas Daf Kuf. That's a whole blot that tells the story of Rebbeinu HaKodesh passing away, with a lot of very interesting details. Number one, he asked for his mishamshim, his servants, and he said, "Heim shimshuni b'chaye, v'heim shimshuni acharei moisi." They served me during my physical life. They should serve me after I died. Frag the Gemara. Does that mean that they passed away after Rebbe or they passed away before Rebbe? And the Gemara answers they actually passed away before Rebbe. They get to El Basal Yenim ahead of Rebbe. Another thing that the Gemara says that Rebbe said that I need to have meat kisei b'mkeimei and meat amutzas. The lashon is b'mkoimei. I need to have a table and a chair and a bed and a candle. Rabbeinu HaKodesh says you have to do what they do by the minyan over here. Is they put out the Rebbe's stende and they put out the Rebbe's chair. That is correct. I don't think that that's a Mishachist idea. This is the Gemara Masechet Ksubis. The Shvil is a different story, but to put out the Rebbe's place is something that the Gemara speaks about. The Rebbe says you have to keep my kalim the way they are. And then the Gemara says, I'm in the Chazak. Why would Rabbeinu HaKodesh say that Mita Mutzas and Kisei, everything should be in its place? Because Rabbeinu HaKodesh would physically come home Friday night. Every Friday night, Rebbe came home to his family, and he made Kiddush, and he spent the night. So on this Gemara, there's a Sefer Chassidim. After he passed away. On this Gemara, there's a Sefer Chassidim. Sefer Chassidim was written by Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. The Rebbe HaChassid, from the greatest Mukabal who ever lived, the Baal Shem Tov said about Rebbe HaChassid, if we knew how great Rabbi Yehuda, he said, I can't understand what's possible for a Yelud Isha Zol Masak Zayin Azoy Hoich, a person born to a physical mother should understand so much. Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid adds, Rabbeinu HaKodesh came home Friday night, and he made Kiddush, and he physically drank the wine, and he was moitze his family with Kiddush. He was moitze the shpacha with Kiddush. Now here's the shaila. If, let's say, a neshama comes from the other world, and he has a special schus, or whatever the case is, that because he comes from the other world, he comes in a goof and you see him. The halacha is b'meisim chavshi. The halacha is the dead have no mitzvahs. That is why there's a custom by Yidden, that when you bury a person in a talis, you make the tzitzis posel. Because a bar minan, a deceased person, that's why you have to tuck your tzitzis in. That's why you don't put film on in a cemetery, and you don't do mitzvahs in a cemetery, because it's called loyeg larosh. The people who have passed away are part of more mitzvahs. So Abiנו HaKodesh passed away. So he's coming home Friday night, whatever the explanation for that is. He's making Kiddush Friday night, whatever the explanation for that is. He's drinking the wine, which is even a bigger pella. How does a neshama that's not in this world drink physical wine? But how could he be moitz mishpacha with Kiddush? He's not mechoyev. And everybody knows if you're not mechoyev in the mitzvah, you can't be moitz somebody else. And the teretz is that Abiנו HaKodesh was halachically, physically alive. He was moitz mishpacha with Kiddush because he had the same mechiv of Kiddush as they had. And the Rebbe spoke about this when he get to the Sfarim. I told this to you, I think, in one of the talks I gave. The Rebbe said that the Alter Rebbe asked the Mezritcher Magid and the Baal Shem Tov, why are you sitting in jail? And they said to him, you're sitting in jail because you're spreading too much chassidus. So the Alter Rebbe said, so I'll stop. And they said, no, now that you started, you should continue. So the Rebbe asked the Poshet Kasha. The Baal Shem Tov and the Magid had passed away. And we know Teira Leba Shamayim, Teira's not in heaven. How could he rely on their psak? They're not in this world. They're not entitled to a psak. And the Rebbe answered that because they came in a goof, they had a din of Teira Leba Shamayim. They were considered in this world. And they're able to paskin halacha, which the Alter Rebbe later followed. I believe this vart that the Rebbe said is very similar to this Sefer Chasidim. And of course, the end of the story was that Shevavusei the Rebbe, one of the maidservants, told the neighbors to be quiet. So the neighbor said, why should I be quiet? He says, why should he be quiet? The Rebbe is sitting in the other room, in the house. Sabrina, you nuts? He passed away a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Anyway, word got out that the Rebbe came home Friday night, so the Rebbe stopped coming. As they state in the Gemara. But there's one more thing I'm going to add, and I'm going to finish with this. That the Gemara says, "V'yem shemeis Rebbe batla kedusha." And the day that the Rebbe passed away, holiness stopped. So this is some people connected to the Gemara at the end of Saita. Tosfos has all kinds of issues with it. But on this Gemara, batla kedusha, there's a Tosfos. And in the Tosfos, there's a quote from Reb Chaim Kohen. Reb Chaim was one of the Balei Tosfos who was a Kohen. And this Reb Chaim Kohen said, if I would have been by the Levaya of Rabbeinu Tam, I would have been Metama myself. This Reb Chaim Kohen said, if I had been Zoiche, he lived at the same time, but he wasn't by his Levaya. If I had been Zoiche to be by the Levaya of Rabbeinu Tam, I would have been Metama myself, because by Rabbeinu Tam there was no Tumah. And he explained the pshat in the words, Botla Kedusha, that the Botla Tumah. The HaKodesh passes away. When a person passes away, there's halachas of tumah, and kohen and Allah be metama themselves. And of course, if you're a kohen, you know one of the strangest halachas of tumah by a kohen is, if you're already tamei and you metama yourself again, you get malchus. You're not going to be meisef al tumah. If a kohen takes too long walking out of a cemetery, he takes a casual walk, and you tell him, rush, you shouldn't be in a beis hachayim. And he takes his time, it could be that if you gave him a separate hasra, he gets a separate malchus, because even though he's tamei already, now be meisef al tumah, and Aviנו Chaim HaKohen said that the chat and the words, Batla Kedusha, was the day Rabbi HaKodesh passed away, Batla Tumah. There was no tumah, because his guf was not metamen. The guf Kodesh of Rabbeinu HaKodesh was not metamen. So this is the other side of the coin, that the Yaakov Avinu Leimeis is literally a physical thing. And of course, the way the Rebbe explained it is what I said before, that there are some tzaddikim, and the Rebbe spoke about this, but again, some Friedrich Rebbe, who are balabayas over themselves. When a person, the whole definition of death, it's 60 times like sleep. What happens when you're sleeping? You dream. What happens when you dream? You can't move. When you dream, you see images all around you, but the only way to get away from the boogeyman who's chasing you is to wake up. You can't move. When a person passes away, they have no control. There were some tzaddikim who were balabayas over their neshama. And even to the extent that the neshama could be able to be mislabish in a guf. And this is some of the insights into this Maimeh Chazal. Yaakov Avinu Leimeis. Okay, let's have a ma'ariv.